Today we're being joined by Sandringham Dragons and the Vic Metro under-18s boys coach, Rob Harding. Rob, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. So obviously the Sandringham Dragons coach and the Vic Metro coach, but before we get into that side of things, what's the journey like been for you to get to there? I understand you obviously coach in Norwood in the Sample and some AFL roles before that as well.
Yeah, it's been a long journey for me to get to this point. I'd stopped playing at a pretty young age. I hurt my hip really badly when I was 15 playing school footy and had to give the game away and had surgery on that about 6 years later. And by the time I had surgery and recovered from that, I started heading down the path of working at AFL clubs and started out in an analyst role initially as a footy analyst and then progressed across into doing opposition scouting for a long time. So I was fortunate enough to have 12 years at AFL level across 4 different clubs, North Melbourne, Geelong, Adelaide and Essendon, and progressed through from doing Oppo into more strategy and then my last few years at Essendon as an assistant coach to John Worsfold. So really progressed through the ranks and through my 20s was really almost undergoing a PhD in footy in a way, like just learning on the job basically as we went. And after being sidelined a bit with COVID for a year, I went back to Adelaide and joined the Norwood Footy Club, and I was lucky enough to be the footy manager and reserves coach there. So I was able to learn a bit of the admin side, but also keep that coaching bug going. And we were able to win the league premiership at the end of last year at 2022, which was a fantastic achievement with that group. So been fortunate to have some success at AFL level with Geelong in 2011, be part of that premiership as an analyst, and then 2022 at Norwood, and then got the opportunity to come back to Victoria and coach the Sandringham Dragons, which is a region that's been really successful and produced a lot of high-end talent. So to have that opportunity and then to be given the Vic Metro head coaching role as well was a great honour.
Yeah, I always find it personally interesting is how someone could progress from an analysis, as you said you've been, and then get an assistant coach role. You mentioned at the Bombers. How does that transition work from being an analysis to then jumping into coaching and even being offered that type of role at Essendon, for example, like you mentioned, under Worsfold? Yeah,
it's really unusual. It doesn't happen a lot, to be honest. I think my skill set, I was an analyst, but I'm fortunate. My dad, who passed away a few years ago, he was a coach and coached at a reasonable level in school footy here in Melbourne. And I think it's been in the blood a little bit, coaching and teaching. So I was able to progress across. And I think the main thing, when you come from outside the standard pathway, when I haven't been a player at AFL level, it's to learn and absorb as much as possible. I was forever asking questions of the guys I worked with, players and coaches, and learning on the job. And the way I looked at it was that my first year, or my year 12 year essentially, was 2003. The number one pick that year was Adam Cooney. And if in 12, 14 years' time, Adam Cooney finished his AFL career, Brownlow medalist, 270 games across a couple of clubs, I can't compete with that. What I can compete with is that I'll have 12 years of AFL experience inside coaching groups, inside the 4 walls, sitting in every meeting, listening, learning, absorbing, and hopefully being able to translate that and take it on to the next level. So really my opportunities came on the back of not really applying for jobs, but being asked if I was interested in changing clubs or taking on a greater role. And I'm very grateful to have had the faith of people along the way, like Brenton Sanderson, like John Worsfold, who gave me opportunities, who acknowledged some talent that I was bringing to the table and trusted in me to progress to the next stage. And I think what I've really tried to do over the last 15 years is build a rounded CV that encompasses a lot of different areas, from being an analyst to being a coach to being a footy manager, and be able to take all those little skills and progress them now into coaching young men at a really high level.
So the Sandringham Dragons, obviously, your previous job to the Sandringham Dragons was at Norwood. How was the transition to move from Norwood, obviously coaching there as well for a couple of years, and then now moving into the Sandy Dragons? How did that come about? And obviously, you're happy with the opportunity so far, and the team's going pretty well in the under-18 championship so far on top.
Yeah, I've been really happy with how the team's been going this year, and really lucky to inherit a program that's been incredibly well run over a number of years. But my experience at Norwood was fantastic, and it was great to head back to Adelaide. I'd spent 5 years over there at the Crows, and to head back to Adelaide and reconnect with some people there and have an opportunity to work in second tier footy was great for me. The reality is, if you look forward to now at Sandy, is that we have 70 players on our list this year between top ages and bottom ages, and we hope over the next 2 years that 15 to 18 get an opportunity to play AFL. There's going to be a significant chunk that are going on to play VFL footy, sample footy, waffle footy, and have really good careers as second-tier footballers. And I've experienced what that looks like, and can speak to them about that now. So my time at Nord was really valuable, and our CEO there was James Fantasia, who has a great history in recruiting and has been a great support for me along the way, and learned a lot from Jade Rawlings, the head coach there. So to work in with those guys, to learn the management side, to be able to now run a program that encompasses high performance, player wellbeing, and coaching. I took a lot from my time at Norwood, and it's really supported me with that.
So the Sandringham Dragons, obviously, you're at currently. How's the season been for you guys? Obviously, you're going pretty well on top. But how's it like coaching guys like Riley Sanders, Harvey Johnson, Archer Roberts, Ollie Murphy? There's a lot of players in that team that are ranked highly as well in the draft pool this year. How's it like coaching those guys and other people in the team?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. And when I started here, I think in pre-season we started off with about 85 players on the track. We ballooned out to 96 at one point, and for me, there's a lot of names to learn, a lot of faces, and as well as learning the coaches and learning the staff and implementing the style of football and the teaching that I wanted in this program. So it took me a little bit to get my head across everyone and their strengths and weaknesses and what we need to work on, and build, most importantly, personal relationships with all the players on the list. And that's probably the thing I'm most proud of across this year is that's what I've been able to do with this group. So you talk about the top end guys there, but I'd like to think whether you're player 1 or player 75 on our list this year, I've given a lot of time to each of the boys, and hopefully help them, more importantly, develop as young men rather than just develop as footballers. And the reality of the Sandringham list every year, and Oakley have the same issue, is that we have a high percentage of private school players who we lose through the middle part of the year. So this year we had 39, I think it was, private school year 12 and year 11 kids on our list. Then we have another 30 that are non-private. So getting the group to mold together and build good relationships is a really important part of it. It also means that there's an enormous amount of chopping and changing in our team. So you mentioned Riley Sanders. Riley will play for the Dragons this week. It'll be the first time he's played for the Dragons since round 3. And in the meantime, he's played for the AFL Academy. He's played for Melbourne Grammar, his school. He's played for the Allies as well. So he's been all around the place this year, and he comes back to the Dragons now, which is great. Archie Roberts, similar with his time at Haileybury and Vic Metro. And then guys like Harvey Johnston, Tarkin O'Leary, Will Brown, these guys have bounced between VFL programs now late in the season, school footy for a couple of those guys, and then also plenty of time at the Dragons through the years. So there's a real big management piece to this role, and I actually quite enjoy that side of it, to be honest.
I was actually just going to ask you both in particular about Tarkin O'Leary and Harvey Johnson, who both play for Sandringham St Kilda's VFL Alliance side in the VFL. What type of experience do you think that could give them potentially in a year's time where they're on an AFL list, where they get that experience now to start at that lower level, and it could give them a bit of confidence when they get into the list officially next year?
I think it's fantastic for those two who have been able to play with the Zebras, who are our aligned club, obviously, and also for Will Brown and Luke Lloyd, who have been able to play with Frankston as well this year. And for those 4 guys to play VFL footy, they get a feel for what the bigger bodies are like at the next level. Right. And it's a great little stepping stone into what an AFL career for each of those 4 will hopefully look like at the end of the year. And all 4 have been able to acquit themselves really well at VFL level, which is a great credit to all of them.
I did see that Tarkin kicked a really nice goal recently, a couple of weeks ago for Sandringham as well. Must be pretty pumped to have a great goal like that as well.
I'm pretty sure Tarkin's goal has got a few thousand views on it, and between him and his mum, I think that counts for about 500 of them, and I think me for another 200. So, look, it was a great goal, and Will Brown kicked a fantastic set shot goal. Luke Lloyd's been able to take some great contested marks, and Harvey Johnson's been able to show his running power, getting up the ground and resetting back and kick goal as well. So these guys are able to show little bits. I think that's all recruiters are looking for. They're not expecting anyone to go out and have 35 in a VFL game. Yeah. Saw Harley Reid's first game at VFL level. He had 10 touches. So that's all you can really expect for these young guys at that level. But what a great opportunity for all of them.
You mentioned before the success of how the Sandringham Dragons got so many successful players. I'm just looking at some of the lists from last year. You got Will Ashcroft, obviously Harry Sheasel, Cam McKenzie, Charlie Clark, Hugo Hall-Kahan, Angus McLennan, Ollie Houghton, Max Ramsden, and Toby McMullen, just to name last year's crop. Just shows how successful this program is. And how many guys do you expect to get drafted again this year? Would it be roughly to say about at least 7 or so?
It's hard to say the exact number. Certainly, I think the difference between last year's team and this year's team, and obviously I wasn't the coach last year, Wayne Cripps did a fantastic job with them, and our talent manager, Mark Wheeler, has been absolutely outstanding in this program for a long period of time. And last year they had more probably very, very top end talent. Clearly, when you have 3 of the top 7, that's a really elite crop. This year, I think we've got a few up there, but I think we've got a few more in the middle band of the draft. And there's only going to be, we think, low 50s in terms of number of draft picks. There's obviously a few academy kids which will chew up some points and chew up some picks. So between that and the rookie draft, look, I'd love to sit here and give you an exact number. 7, 8 plus would be great. At the end of the day, when you look at only 50 picks, if we had anything more than 7 or 8, I think that would be a fantastic effort for this program.
Now, obviously, as you said, you just came into the role as the Sandringham Dragons coach this year. But why do you think Sandringham Dragons is always so successful in? Because I would feel, and it's well publicised, that they're probably the strongest coach league club that continuously, year in, year out, gets many players recruited to AFL clubs in the end. Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've got the benefit of having some really strong junior competitions underneath this. So the South Metro Junior Footy League does a fantastic job. It's a great league, and the Southern Football Netball League as well in this region. Plus, we have a few VAFA clubs as well that we feed into. We have a number of private schools, which helps, and a couple of boarding houses for that helps as well. So there's a few different things. But I do think one thing I've noticed in this region is our talent identification at a lower level is really strong. So we still look to bring in kids that pop up, and that might develop a little bit later. But I think our work at identifying kids who are 14, 15 years old and bringing them into the pathway it has been really strong. And I know this year, Ben Meredith's our under-16s coach. He also helps coach the midfield at 18s level. And Ben and I have been really well aligned about the type of footy we want to see and the way we want to train our young men. And I'd like to think over the next few years, players that have been part of our futures program in the 16s will progress really well into the 18s and hopefully maximise their talent. So part of it's identification, part of it's also having a consistent development program across the board.
So obviously with the Vic Metro side, obviously they had their All-Australian, the championships recently, and there was obviously an All-Australian team come out. I'm just looking at the list again here. You must be pretty proud coaching the Vic Metro side and seeing a multitude of names on your list just from Vic Metro alone in the All-Australian team. Ollie Murphy, Archer Roberts, I know Riley Sanders is for the Allies, but obviously for Sandy Dragons as well. And you got a few other guys as well. Nick Watson, obviously, who obviously you mentioned, is at the top end of the draft. Levi Ashcroft, obviously in next year's draft. William Green as well. So it'd be pretty nice to see some names, especially those underage guys like Levi Ashcroft, obviously brother of Will, being in the crop already and in the All-Australian team, and he's not even eligible this year.
Yeah, and he's 2 weeks off not being eligible for next year either. He's a mid-December birthday, so Levi's an exception. But yeah, look, on the first training session, when you get that group together, and I inherited the program sort of halfway through after Jason Davenport got the job at GWS and left Oakley and left the Vic Metro job. So we sort of picked up the program halfway through, and clearly, as soon as you run a training session with that level of talent, it just stands out. The ball zings around pretty quick, and there's a high level of capability out there, which is great fun as a coach. And are really well supported by all the Metro club coaches that were part of it. So Trent Dennis-Lane from the Western Jets coached our forwards. Anthony Rocker from Northern looked after our team defence and the talls. Lauren Moorcroft at Eastern and Paul Griffiths at Oakley were our midfield coaches. And Andrew Sturgis coached the 16s to a championship win, which was fantastic for Metro. It's a Calder Cannons coach and coached the backs with the 18s. So us as a group of coaches, we just have so much talent to work with. And the biggest thing is trying to present them a program that helps challenge them a little bit and make them a little bit better as players. And to learn to work together with guys they don't necessarily know all that well. I think the exciting thing for next year with that is that we have 36 players in the squad this year and 12 of them are bottom ages. So that group that includes Levi Ashcroft and Luke Traynor, Luca Grego, Jagger Smith, Josh Smiley, Murphy Reid, the list goes on and on. Those guys are going to be the core of that group for next year, as well as the 16s championship side that comes up. So, I hope the Metro side is going to be pretty strong, and I look forward to coaching it again next year.
What's it like coaching Nick Watson? Obviously, he's an energetic guy. He loves to kick a goal. What's it like coaching him in the Metro side?
It's good fun. Like he's a good character, Watto. He's good for a laugh, and he's quite humble. And I wasn't really sure what to expect with him. Obviously, I'd seen the highlights like the rest of us have, and he was fantastic in his dealings with me. I couldn't speak more highly of Nick as a young man, and I know he's really engaged with his teammates. He makes a huge effort with the guys at Caulfield to engage with them, and his footy speaks for itself. He's a high level talent. There's been a lot of attention and a lot of pressure on him, and he's handled that exceptionally well through this year. So I'm looking forward to seeing him play a little bit further up the ground at times. I think that will be the next step for him, that he, naturally he can sit out the back and kick goals pretty easily, but at AFL level, he's going to need to do that and a few other things. And we used him in particularly in the SA game, in our first Metro game. We got him up the ground around stoppage and then resetting back. And He looks really dangerous when he does that. So there's a lot of layers to Nick's game. He's good overhead. He's great around goals. He's a ripping young man. So it's going to be fun to watch him over the next 10, 12 years at AFL level.
What AFL player comparison would you try and describe Nick as? So Bailey Humphrey, obviously for Moe Victoria last year, he was that sort of mid-forward type. Would you say he's that similar type of player, or are they a bit different? And would there be a different comparison you'd have for Nick?
Yeah, it's a really challenging comparison because he's quite unique. He's got a lot of Eddie Betts about him, to be honest. And I was fortunate enough to spend 4 years with Eddie at the Crows, and Eddie's strength was overhead as well as ground level, and Watto's got a bit of that as well. He's a slightly bigger frame than Watto, similar than Eddie, but similar sort of height. So I think what we did a lot with Eddie at the Crows, and Phil Walsh and Brenton Sanderson and Don Pike were fantastic with this, was that they got him up the ground, got him around stoppage. Back then, before the 666, you could run him off the back of the square and get him away from the defenders and give him some of those little tools and tricks to help. And obviously Eddie, an incredible talent on his own. So he reminds me a bit of Eddie in a different sort of way. But he's just such a unique matchup, Watto. And we haven't really seen a dominant marking small forward, probably going back to someone like a Phil Matera. So it's a long time since we've seen a dominant marking small forward like this. And I can't wait to see him at the next level.
So who are some players that you think that need to keep an eye out on, whether it's at Vic Metro, Sandy Dragons, any other club, whether it's a Sample, Waffle? Who are some players that you think people need to start thinking about that aren't so much getting talked about as much as the top guys are?
Look, it's really interesting talking to a lot of clubs at the moment. There's a lot of different opinions around where guys sit, who's going to get drafted, who isn't. I think there's a great example at the moment in our program at the Sandy Dragons, a kid named Charlie Edwards, who was at Melbourne Grammar through the middle of the year. He's a great cricketer, so he played a lot of cricket through summer, and that delayed the start of his footy year. But he's played some good school footy. He had a standout game for Dragons against Dandenong Stingrays down in Frankston about 6 weeks ago, and every club has really been captured by him since then. So, we're hopeful Charlie gets drafted. I think there's a fair chance he will now, and it's a great credit to him. And there are a lot of players like this who are playing in Coates League programs who just need that bit of attention, just that moment where they stand out, a couple of recruiters see them, and their name starts to fly a little bit more. So I think we all know plenty about the Nick Watsons and the Nate Caddies of the world, and Harley Reid and all these top-end draft picks, the Gold Coast Academy boys who are going to go pretty high up. There's going to be some fantastic players in this draft that go in the second, third, fourth round in that real middle band. And I think we'll look back in 5-10 years and see that someone who was picked in maybe a mid-20s pick like Logan Morris from the Western Jets, and he ends up being a great third tall forward or third tall defender at AFL level.
Who has been probably the biggest improver, whether it's at the Sandy Dragons or at the Vic Metro side? Who do you think's been the biggest improver for you to coach this year?
Ollie Murphy's the standout for me at the Dragons. So Ollie played one game as a wingman last year. By his own admission, I'm not sure it went all that well at Coates League level. He's 200 centimetres. He runs really well. He's got long, skinny arms at the moment. He's going to fill out in time. But we trained Ollie and another young defender, Lockie Voss, who played a fair bit of ruck and forward. We trained those two at the backs over summer with the idea that every AFL club is looking for someone that can play on Joe Danaher and play on Harry Mackay and play on Ben King and Max King. And 200-centimetre key defenders just don't grow on trees. They're very hard to find. So these two young men took the challenge and worked really hard on their craft. Unfortunately for Lockie, he hurt his foot in round one, but he's back now playing with us, and he still might be an outside chance if we get a few games in, obviously, over the next 6 weeks. But in Ollie's case, his game's just gone from strength to strength, and his one-on-one competitiveness defensively has been outstanding. He hates losing contests, and he's really added the element of intercept mark, and he's a beautiful kick. So, Ollie goes from someone who was really not on the books, I don't think, anywhere at the start of the year, to being a consideration for Vic Metro, to being in Vic Metro, to being the MVP for Vic Metro, finished second in the Metro Best and Fairest, to be an under-18 All-Australian, and now he's going to be a first or second round draft pick. So Ollie's one who shows just how much development can happen in the space of this 12 months. And you have to remember, these young men in their top age year are 17 turning 18. It's a time of their life where they're developing a lot physically, emotionally, and as well as their footy. So we can see them make enormous strides within the 1 year.
So what is some coach successful stories that you're very proud of, whether that's currently at one of your current clubs or in previous clubs? What's one of the best coach successful moments that you're pretty proud of that's achieved pretty well for someone?
I think the guys that you look at are the ones who work exceptionally hard and maybe are coming from a bit further back. There's everyone's story is a little bit different when you're progressing through footy, and some guys are really highly rated as youngsters, and some guys develop a little bit later. And there's a player who played in Norwood's premiership last year named Mitch Carroll, who wore number 48. And Mitch started the year, I was coaching the reserves. He started the year playing local footy, which means he wasn't even in our reserves team. Yeah. And he progressed into getting back into the reserves, playing good footy, changed roles, became a wingman, then a half forward after starting as a half back. Made his league debut late in the year, was out of the side, got back into the side, held his spot, kicked a goal on grand final day in a tight game. Stories like that are the ones that you just absolutely love, because he took the feedback on board. He worked so hard on his game. He's a great character, and you love to see people like that get rewarded.
Now, I'm gonna one more question left for you, Rob. So I really appreciate you coming on. It's probably the toughest question I've given you so far. Rank your top 5 in this year's draft from pick 1 from Harley down to 5.
Oh, that is a tough one. It's very tough.
You can include the Jed Walter bid and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, look, having seen Jed up close during the national championships, he's an exceptional talent. His marking ability and his ability to follow up at ground level is great. So, if Harley goes 1, I think Jed does go number 2. I'm a big fan of Colby McKercher. I think he's an exceptional talent. I really like Daniel Curtin from WA. I think he's going to be a real interesting watch over the next few years. Does he end up being that big Paddy Cripps style mid, or does he end up being more of a key defender? I think he could do both. And realistically, I think he could probably play him forward as well, and he'd be able to have a pretty significant impact there as well. So I like those 4 in the top 4. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with West Coast. They may trade back a little bit to see if they can get Curtin and potentially get someone like a Mitch Edwards as well for their long-term ruck stocks. I think the other one to watch is Gold Coast, whether or not they try and trade up to get a pick in before the academy bids come, and they're going to need about 10,000 points to satisfy all these academy players. So, look, those are the 4 I give you off the top. I think Riley Sanders is up there in that mix as well. So it's not hard to see how the Allies were pretty handy at the national champs when you got those 3 and Ethan Reid putting the ball down their throat. But look, that's probably the 5 I see at the moment. I think the top end stands out. Watto's in that mix. Nate Caddy's in that mix as well. I'm a big rap for Nate. I think Ollie Murphy's up there as well. And you're going to see clubs, I think, pick a little bit for need from about pick 6 or 7 onwards. The first 4 or 5 will be the best picks available. But after that, it might chop and change a little bit depending on what clubs need. And as I said before, I do think in this draft, you're going to see players picked in the 20s and 30s. And I'll use a couple of Dragons guys as examples. Where Will Brown goes, where Harvey Johnston goes, where Tarkin O'Leary goes. Luke Lloyd, we think's hopefully going to be up there as well. These guys, Vigo Vizentini's another one, big ruckman. These guys are going to get picked anywhere between 10 and 50, but are going to end up being really great AFL players for their clubs. And I, for one, can't wait to sit there and watch them for the next 10 years and enjoy all their hard work paying off.
Rob, I really appreciate you coming on. All the best for the rest of the season at the Sandy Dragons and Vic Metro when you got the thing going on for the rest of the season. So I really appreciate you coming on, Rob, and all the best for the rest of the season.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
No worries.